And now to the Suicide Squad, which is not called Suicide Squad 2 because Warner Brothers would like everyone to forget that they made Suicide Squad 1, even though the Suicide Squad kind of expects you to remember the plot, several character relationships, and at least the basic premise of Suicide Squad 1 so it can dispense with all but the most cursory setup and literally drop the audience and characters into a dare you to keep up opening action sequence that establishes an appropriately audacious tone of wild ultraviolence and expertly interwoven pitch dark comedy and cartoon slapstick that the rest of the film only sort of manages to consistently follow through on, maintaining the audacious aesthetic but gradually backing away from stepping too far off the moving sidewalk. Maybe that's a function of how fast the culture moves now. The turnover happens too fast for anything of this size to stay edgy from the time it's begun to when it's released. Conceived in the aftermath of both its own studio releasing a chopped up version of what probably wasn't that great of an original film in the first place, part of the ongoing rolling fallout from the disastrous beginning and even more disastrous attempted midway course correction of the early DC Universe franchise, and rival Disney's similarly shameful, though now thankfully corrected, firing of director James Gunn over a fake outrage campaign generated by right-wing political operatives, the pseudo-sequel reboot instead arrives in the aftermath of even more turmoil and uncertainty, as, thanks to the pandemic, in the time it's taken to make and release it, Warner Brothers has passed into and out of the hands of AT&T and been sold for parts to Discovery after a garbage fire of mismanagement, and the future of the brand is now in more trouble than ever. The movie, though, it's pretty alright. Yeah, this guy should have been a general for this kind of ability to manage other people's bullshit in a crisis, I'll tell ya. Anyway, if you missed the first one, or forgot, or just never cared, our premise goes like this. You know how DC Comics superhero stories have some cool good guys, but like a lot of really great bad guys? Like how even just Batman by himself has dozens of bad guys with fun nicknames and gimmicks everyone remembers, and they're always the best part of the movies or TV shows or whatever? Well, what if there was a covert government program that takes those guys out of prison when they get locked up and has them do illegal Black Ops paramilitary missions to get time off their sentences? So like the Dirty Dozen, but supervillains. You might say, oh, so like the best spin-off exploitation concept for secondary comic book properties ever, basically? And this has existed for decades? Something a smart movie studio that owned it would have been making like one a year of since that first Batman movie back in 1989? Well, yeah, except Warner Brothers has only done 2, and this is the first good one. Anyway, whatever brought us to the lack of needing a true Act 1 turns out to be something of a blessing, as the Suicide Squad is able to leap to its main set of immediate goals, laying out a mid-1980s canon film-style scuzzy weirdo action archetypes on a sketchy mission in a rando Latin American tropical jungle nation during a chaotic military coup movie as a broad canvas, whereupon Gunn can alternate between burning through, blowing up, and occasionally injecting an admirable level of actual pathos into DC's D through Z list of background material, complete with Sylvester Stallone himself as the voice of a CGI character and Alice Braga as the character you expect Alice Braga to be in a version of this movie without any comic book stuff. The nominal premise is the squad is being dispatched to destroy a dangerous experimental weapon that the island nation's prior government was keeping locked up, and the US no longer trusts the now hostile new government not to unleash. No prizes for guessing that there's more going on there, and whatever it is will throw a wrench in the squad's already shaky as hell unit cohesion and convoluted sense of duty and self-interest. As one expects from Gunn after his success with Guardians of the Galaxy films over at Marvel, the whole enterprise really does feel like an ensemble piece, with the main characters all getting a solid balance of exposure and depth once it's sorted who the main characters actually are, though it's quickly apparent that our hero part this time goes to Idris Elba as Bloodsport, a ruthless mercenary assassin who pulls increasingly absurd weapons out of thin air like a high-tech Elmer Fudd, while doing an otherwise dead serious riff on the world-weary gunslinger bit opposite Joel Kinnaman, returning as field leader and exposition guy Rick Flag, returning only thing we did right in the first one, Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, Daniela Melchior as Ratcatcher 2, aka the weird cute one who says weird cute things, David Decimal Kane as a sad sack polka dot man, and full-bore comic relief in the form of John Cena's ideologically confused Peacemaker and the aforementioned Stallone as the instantly iconic Nanaue, aka King Shark, who is a shark.
So smart, me.
He's strong and deadly.
He has very kind eyes.
Hungry. Bird. And
Yes, that is your hand. Very good.
To say much more about what's going on would be to give too much away. The strength of the thing when it's working is that effectively copy-pasting the squad characters into a standard B-movie action plot outline of American good guys blast their way through the background of a fictional Cuba-ish, Panama-esque, Grenada-like mid-coup country with familiar from the news jungle, red light district, rebel camp, and capital city backdrops as staging grounds for shootouts and missions, leaves plenty of room for a loose improvisational feel of the proceedings so that the anything can go wrong, will go wrong plotting feels organic and the players all have plenty of room to work out their best material. The film is at its best when the characters and Gunn are both operating free from the constraints of adhering to any kind of narrative or moral coherency and making mischief to make it, reasserting the premise that Viola Davis as the squad's Pentagon boss Amanda Waller deploys them more like living hand grenades than precision missiles. There's a surprising amount of upfront acknowledgement of just how dark and also how darkly funny the premise can be, carried all the way to its logical extreme up front in terms of Waller's willingness to spend and take lives, and the various squad assignees' eagerness to do the taking since they are, after all, bad guys through and through, which is why it's so unfortunate that eventually that same tone gives way to still enjoyable but less meaningfully distinct heroics and good-evil delineations impressions as it wears on. Not that the utterly absurd final action blowout isn't delightful on its own terms, it very much is, and kudos to both Gunn for going with something so conceptually and tonally ridiculous, and the studio for saying, yes, we get it, let's do it, but getting there involves a few too many here's what's really going on, good evil twists that almost feel exactly reversed from where they ought to be. Shouldn't be on the other side of this? Isn't it more in line with the setting and more interesting if does the right thing about but for the wrong reasons because trying to avoid the spoilers here. On the same lines, the second act gets significantly derailed for a subplot devoted entirely to Harley Quinn, which, in a film that's otherwise happily cutting back and forth between parallel action across days and hours to juggle its multiple characters and moving parts, gets weirdly sectioned off into its own beginning, middle, and end in what can't help but feel like a case of, look, Margot has a huge production deal with the studio, it's one of the only A-list actors who wants to make movies in this franchise with us, Harley is one of maybe 3 characters we haven't ruined as theatrical brands at this point, so she gets her own mini-movie inside the movie, okay? Make it work. Not that Margot Robbie isn't as much fun here as she was in Birds of Prey, or that when her lengthy digression arrives at its punchline, the actual point isn't appreciated in an okay, I guess that was specifically overdue in this case sort of way, but it definitely throws the rhythm of the thing off for a bit. Still, there's quite a bit to recommend here, even if it's not the strongest work from anyone involved. The action sequences are big, nasty, and inventive, the mix of old school over-the-top bloodshed and modern comic book absurdism is consistently impressive, and while the 2 Guardians films are in no danger of being dethroned as Gunn's most impressive work as the Mr. Emotional transcendence of mainstream pop superhero cinema, it's nonetheless compelling to see him and the actors draw out real humanity in the talking shark man, the girl who talks to rats, or the sad weirdo whose seemingly laughable power of throwing polka dots at people is revealed as a gradually more brutally sad, debilitating condition as the story wears on. Likewise, it's also a hoot to see him unshackled to indulge the naughtier mean streak from his days in the trauma grindhouse whenever the action needs to remind us that we're watching an R-rated film. So call this a 7 out of 10. It's not a home run, but it's a big improvement and a very good time.